And he joins us here on a Monday afternoon. He's William Qualkenbush, 105.5 The Roar in the Upstate. Qualt, big guy, what's going on, man? How are you?
Wani, I'm doing great. I didn't think we were going to see the sun this week, and lo and behold, it came out to play today. So I'm feeling nice. I'm feeling peppy, and I'm excited to talk to you. How are you?
Listen, I'm good, Qualt, but I do have some questions about this Clemson Tiger basketball team, and I think you will perceive them of the good variety. I don't know if you're a Sopranos fan, Qualt, but I think for a lot of our listeners, the phrase that Paulie Walnuts often threw out, just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. That seems to be the story. That may have even been Sal may have dropped that line quite a number of times as well, but to me, that's kind of the story right now for this Clemson Tiger basketball team. I mean, there have been the ebbs and the flows during Brad Brownell's tenure. But this is one of those times where I've got listeners texting and calling the show and saying, hey, I'm back in. I'm back with this basketball program.
Well, first of all, yeah, I do think both of them say it. A big Sopranos fan, by the way. I in my brain, I've got Sal saying it. They pull me back in, and they like I see him doing this great. Yeah, I mean, this is a team you can't quit. It's a team you can't quit, and I learned that firsthand. Look, I've seen that what we just saw in Tallahassee. I've seen it, and at halftime, I knew they're going to lose, and here's the reason why. Because we've seen that script so many times in Tallahassee. Here's what happens, and I say it every year, and I prepare people beforehand for it because it's going to come. It's like clockwork every year. Clemson's going to be ahead of halftime, which in this case they were down one, which goes into a little bit of why I was a bit skeptical. Clemson is going to be ahead of halftime, and Leonard Hamilton's going to go in after the half, and he's going to be like, "All right, guys, we're going to play some purposeful defense, and we're not just going to sit back." He feels like a guy who sometimes will do like the football defensive coordinator thing where he's like, all right, can I get pressure with 4? And he tries to get pressure with 4, and then he can't. He's like, okay, well, maybe I'm just going to have to blitz. Right. And I destroy the quarterback. That's what Leonard Hamilton does with Florida State's defense. They go, okay, well, I'm going to jam the ball, and then I'm going to jam the outlet. I'm going to make you walk it up the floor, and then I'm not going to let you reverse it ever at all, period. End of discussion. We're going to use our length. We're going to get really high on the wings, and we're just not letting you do anything. And we're going to front the post, and we're not going to let you get it in there either. And you're basically just going to have to go one-on-one with us, and that's how this game is going to go. And this was different because they did that at the 14-minute mark of the game. They didn't wait until halftime to make that adjustment. Florida State did it almost immediately, and they ratcheted up the pressure because they knew they couldn't wait. If they didn't ratchet up the pressure, Clemson was going to be up 35 at halftime. The way they were shooting the ball, Hunter Tyson was comfortable in the gym immediately. And so Clemson then, because the pressure's been ratcheted up by a team with some really good-looking athletes, they turn the ball over several times. They had 9 turnovers, I think, in that final 14 minutes of the first half. Had 11 turnovers in the first half, I remember right. And they gave a bunch of points off turnovers. And so I thought, you know what? I've seen this before. They're probably going to play well. It's probably going to be close. They're probably going to lose. And they proved me wrong again. And no matter how many times, like you say, no matter how many times it makes sense, well, this is the time where they lose. Well, this is the time the streak comes to an end. Well, this is the time where they fall short. This is the time where they don't have enough. This is the time where the injuries catch up to them. They just find a way. And it was Hunter Tyson being big early and late. It was P.J. Hall being assertive and getting to the foul line, which I thought he did tremendously well in addition to being able to convert some offensive plays. I thought Chase Hunter was the best player on the floor down the stretch, which I can't remember the last time we said that about a Clemson-Florida State game, about a Clemson player, that they were the best player on the floor down the stretch. Florida State normally has that guy, either like a Michael Smayer who's going to hit threes from wherever, or, that point guard that's 6'6", or like a Jonathan Isaac type player who's going to make a play. I mean, like they always have that guy. And Clemson had that guy in this game, and we saw it on the last play. And you're right. I mean, what's not to love about this team? They just keep finding ways to pull us back in, so to speak.
Again, he's on Twitter at Qualt Talk. And I had to double check, Qualt. The original quote actually came from The Godfather Part 3. Al Pacino said it. And then it's Silvio Dante in Sopranos who rocks it several times. I just wanted to double check because for whatever reason I was thinking it was Paulie. But you know what? I guess the best episode is the one where Paulie and what's the guy's name? They end up in the woods. I can't remember. And they're chasing like the
Oh, yes. That is a good episode. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name. Pine Barrens, I think is the name of that episode. But anyway, doesn't matter. It was Christopher Maltasanti and Paulie
Yeah.
Walnuts. Yeah.
Yeah. There we go.
That's
My
good
guy
stuff.
from the White Lotus.
Yeah, exactly. Now he's old, and
Yeah.
that makes me feel old. So, all right,
Yes.
Qual. Additionally, what is, in your opinion, the top of the mark for this basketball team? I mean, it feels like at this point, a regular season ACC championship is very much on the table. There's opportunity in front of them. I know Virginia and Miami will have a say in that ultimately. But I mean, where do you see this going?
It's a great question. I'm going to say something first to kind of set the tone here for our conversation. I'm going to say that when a lot of times I say when you follow a team closely, you see warts that other people don't see.
Okay.
So we always have to be careful. We always see the best version of other teams and the worst version of ourselves. I think that's pretty clear, especially when you're talking about teams in your perceived peer group. Well, we have an issue with this and these other teams don't, but the fans of that team think the opposite is true, if that makes sense. We tend to have those types of conversations.
Okay.
If I were talking about, let's say, Oregon from across the country that had Clemson's statistical profile, I would say this team looks like a paper tiger because they do have the 2 bad losses. They do play in kind of a rough league. They've had some wins that are a little bit suspect lately, even though I think they're playing fine. I mean, I don't have, I've watched every second of every game. I don't have any issue with the way that they're playing necessarily. They again, the 2 bad losses continue to be an albatross hanging around their neck. And even though they're, the Sagarin ratings and so forth think that they're playing fine right now, and strength of record is like an at-large team, you still might have some skepticism. Now, I'm going to say something crazy. I'm going to say that because I watch this team every game, I think they are much better than their underlying numbers would indicate. And I'm not just talking about the net rating. I'm talking about Ken Palm, who has them about 60, or BPI that has them like in the low 50s. And like I said, Sagarin has them about 50. And obviously the net has them just inside the top 60. Their strength of record, though, is a little bit better. And if you look at just pure, like, we're going to rank teams by almost power rank teams if they were to play each other today, and those types of ratings that are a little more raw and less opponent based and things like that, Clemson looks like a team that could make a Sweet 16. I think this team could go to Elite 8. One of my colleagues said that today, and I agreed with him. I think this is a team because they have answers, because they have found different ways to win throughout the year. If they ever can get whole and not mess up, I do think that one of the dangers with this team is messing up the chemistry of what they've built by trying to integrate old parts back in. That's always a bit of an issue, like in baseball season where teams lose. You lose a piece and then you find an answer, and then you got to figure out, okay, now we're getting that piece back. How do we keep the guy that just broke out in his place engaged? I think that's a challenge. People think that Alex Hemingway is just going to come in here and it's going to be fine, but there are going to be ways of playing that Clemson did before that they can't do. And there are going to be ways of playing that other players are going to have to step up in different lineups and different roles. And maybe some people get fewer minutes. Are they as engaged? Like, there's a lot of the human elements that when Brevin Galloway comes back, like what happens to the minutes for these young guys, the Wiggins and the Godfreys and people like that who are playing really well right now. So those are questions we don't have the answers to. But I do think when you look at March Madness, I think there are 2 distinctive groups that Clemson, that I feel like Clemson doesn't get enough credit for. And I'm going to start with the older group because, to me, Clemson has not had a game where all the old guys play well. They've not had a game where Galloway and Hunter and Tyson and Hall are all clicking. If they did, they score 100. And I know they scored 100 against Penn State, but that was overtime and there's a lot going on there. I mean, seriously, they are doing it with those guys being, at least one of them just being a little bit off.
Yeah.
The good thing about that is, unlike the team that went to the Sweet 16 a half decade ago, that team needed a lot to go right every night. And it got a good draw. That New Mexico State team, I think, was a good opponent for Clemson. And that Auburn team, we know, was on its way down with injuries and inconsistent play and all that stuff. And then they faced the Kansas team. They played well, but they faced the Kansas team. It was a tough draw, and they lost, even though they came back. So, there's a lot of that going on where you got to get a good draw still. But they needed pretty much everything to go well every night. Clemson can win with P.J. Hall being off. I think now it's become a little more difficult because of how, of how much of a struggle it's been for them to get the ball inside if it's not in PJ's hands, at least to get inside effectively. But they've won with Hunter Tyson having some normal nights. They've won with Chase Hunter being off and out of the lineup and going 1 for 10 against Duke. They won without Brevin Galloway. So I think the fact that they have had different combinations of those guys step up in different nights and have been able to do it unselfishly is very good. The other thing is they're getting random contributions on given nights from those young guys, the Shefflins and the Middlebrooks and the Godfreys and the Wiggins. I mean, the Dylan Hunters and the Beatles. Like, there are different times that those guys have stepped up. And you know what? They might not be great the next game, but somebody is. And I know coaches like consistency, Swanee. But for me, if I'm looking at this basketball team and I'm projecting out 6 or 8 weeks from now what they're going to look like, I like the fact that they are not operating at an optimal level and they're still finding ways to win. And they, I'm not sure they need anything except they probably in a tournament setting need P.J. Hall to be very good. Other than that, they can win in a variety of ways without saying, I need X, Y, and Z to go right every single night against every opponent. That, to me, is the strength of this crew.
I think it's also just telling, so if you look at it maybe comparatively to other sports, Stetson Bennett was an older quarterback. It's kind of the thing that gets lost in the wash, if you will. Hendon Hooker, an older quarterback, and you had Hunter Tyson take advantage and come back. You've got Brevin Galloway, who got an extra year, and I'm not saying that it's necessarily Brevin Galloway either, right? But there just seems to be a calmness about this group, even when things are kind of going against them in a ball game. Where in old days, Clemson would have probably crumbled to those pressures. This group seems to rise to those expectations. And that's what's really made them interesting, because you just think at some point, like Charlie Brown and Lucy, it's not going to go their way, but it's just kind of managed to go their way this season. I think a lot of that's got to do with that maturity.
Look, I would agree. And if you asked me to explain it, I would go, well, you can't, but it's going to get done, right? I mean, a lot of this is just people stepping up. And you know what? I do think there's a calming influence of Hunter Tyson being there. I think he is a guy that excels and expects excellence from other people. Those two things don't always come in the same package. In fact, in a lot of situations, they don't. Some people excel quietly. A lot of people excel quietly when they learn how to do that themselves. So that I think is an important part of this team. I'll also say, man, getting somebody like Brevin Galloway who's 1 million years old is great. And
Yeah.
Some of that stuff. Look, I'm telling you, if you look at KenPom right now, Clemson is roughly league average in the nation. They're like right in the middle in terms of experience. Their average minute is played by a player who has just under 2 years of college experience, because they're playing so many freshmen in those reserve minutes. And I feel like if you're not watching the team, right? I mean, when you're watching this team, you know that there's a significant veteran presence that they are relying upon every single night. If I'm just looking at the KenPom raw numbers, I might not say that. I might not say Clemson's got the experience to close out their opponents, because there are other teams that might be just a tad older because they've got more juniors and seniors in their secondary roles, but they don't have the high level star power of age, experience, versatility, all that stuff that Clemson has in Tyson and Galloway and Hall and Hunter. Teams don't have that. And so once again, I would say there are numbers that are, and I hate this as a stats nerd, there are numbers that are just flat out lying, because I think to put a fine point on the discussion that you're having, I think it's a great way to think about this team. This is a team that can fool you on paper, but there's no mystery when you see them in person. And all of that,
Mm.
the way that Brad Brownell has related to this team, he's given them more freedom. They're playing quicker offensively than they ever have by a long shot under Brad Brownell because he trusts them to make good decisions on the break, and he trusts them early in the shot clock to be able to make some things happen and take some quick shots and things of that nature. And his propensity to draw big plays down the stretch. Have you noticed that with better, more experienced players, Brad Brownell looks like a genius more of the time? I mean, I said on my show today, Brad Brownell didn't just start learning how to draw ball plays. It's just that they work now because players can run them. And I think that's something, too, to note, that Brad Brownell would have been noted as an X and O's mastermind sooner had he had a roster like this for more of his tenure at Clemson.
It's amazing because for so many years, I think when you saw the one and done scenarios begin to emerge around the league, I think kind of in the back of your mind, you thought, okay, well, Clemson's going to be able to take advantage of that because they don't recruit the one and done. They're not landing the one
Yes.
and done. And so you thought you'd see some advantages sooner, but it never really materialized like it has this year. Final thing for you, Qualk. I brought this up. I know NIL and everything's a big hot topic and a hot button issue. But, with basketball, there are 5 spots on that court. And I just started thinking, like, with Clemson football kind of rolling the way it has been in recent years, wouldn't, Tiger Impact and things of that nature and just in general NIL in Clemson be more beneficial to the basketball program to really go get some top-tier players for the basketball team over the long haul so that you can kind of nurture this aspect of your athletic department?
No, I would agree with that. And look, some of it is that you've got to do the first things first. And keeping your roster happy in football is always going to be priority one for Tiger Impact and for the NIL infrastructure at Clemson.
Right.
I'm sure there were, I know you probably discussed some of the rumors out there about various players at Clemson football. The ones that didn't hit the portal probably got pay raises, for lack of a better term. Tiger Impact's very engaged on that. The more resources that are required to keep your football roster together, the less there are for everybody else. And so ultimately what sports are going to have to do is, to some degree, and this can be a little bit institutional, but it's also about coaches being willing to sit down with people and being able to sort of leverage boosters and to be able to develop those relationships. Coaches in particular sports are going to have to develop their own donor base for NIL. And the good thing, people don't really know this about Brad Brownell, I don't think. Brad Brownell has some donors that he is very responsible for sort of cultivating here at Clemson. Some very good relationships that he's built with individual people where some of this stuff can get done if he makes a phone call or two to those donors. And I give him a lot of credit for that. He probably doesn't strike people as a guy who's going to sit down at a donor meeting, and it's probably not his favorite thing to do, quite honestly, but he's done a good job of that. And when you're embattled as a coach, as he has been in years, and including this year, it helps to have some big-time donors in your corner. I think he understands that too. And not only from a job security standpoint or a facility standpoint, but from an NIL standpoint. I'm worried, Swanee. I am worried about how much it is going to take to keep a roster together. And if Clemson has the resources to be able to do it and still provide opportunities for women's athletes in sports like softball and women's basketball and so forth, and provide resources for baseball that I know the dear old Clemson organization is very passionate about, baseball and softball scholarships, and try to figure out the men's basketball situation. I just am not sure if it's sustainable unless you are a 50,000 student state school with that type of an alumni base in a big area. I just think the asking price for some of these players is going, it's going up quickly. It's too quick for my comfort level. And so I'll be interested to see how Graham Knepp and Clemson are able to navigate this and keep their arms linked as the rules are requiring them to do right now.
Look, man, I think you're all over it. Always appreciate you, Qualk.